Recorded live at the center of the earth. This is Robots from Tomorrow.
Hello, and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg. Glad to have you with us. Before we get too far into things, if you listen to the show and like what we do here, the best way to follow us is over at SmallStoryCityComics.com. Small Story City Comics is still a great way to stay informed about the wide world of comics. The site is updated multiple times a day with all manner of news, reviews, interviews, other podcasts like Think My Multiversity, the DC3 Cast, and much more. There's a pretty good chance every time you head over to MultiversityComics.com, you'll find something new. You can also check out our full episode archive over at robotsfromtomorrow.libsyn.com. It's the only place you can find all of our 800 plus episodes categorized and completely free. We have a YouTube channel with videos of current episodes and a growing number of episodes from our back catalog. And you could follow us on Blue Sky at rftpodcast.bsky.social. Today we dive back into our shelf-bound category of episodes with another look at the best Bronze Age stories of a DC icon. Having already surveyed the best Superman comics from 1970 to 1986, we change our venue from Metropolis to Gotham City today and give you the first part of this three-part series on the best Bronze Age stories of the Caped Crusader himself, Batman. And joining me for this comics crusade is, once again, the DC3 Cast's very own Vince Ostrowski. Vince, how you doing?
Hey, it's me, your Bronze Age buddy. I'm back again.
Remind me again, I know you had done deep dives into DC stuff before. How much of this material had you read before I tapped you to start reading stuff?
I have read every issue of Detective Comics that's ever been published. And so I had read all the Detective Comics stuff. Most of it was vaguely familiar to me. Mm-hmm. And I had also read some of the Batman issues, particularly the ones by Denny O'Neil and Neal Adams. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, I don't think I had read any of the Brave and the Bold stuff. And there's probably an issue of Batman or two in this group that I hadn't read as well. But yeah, for the most part, the tech stuff and the O'Neil Adams stuff, yes, I was familiar with that.
So when we started talking about Superman, in the first Superman episode, I remember asking you a very general sort of Bronze Age question, what the Bronze Age of comics means to you. Do you think the creators approaching Batman at this time were trying to do the same thing as the Superman writers were in terms of, do you think they felt the same need?
Yeah, I think they did. I think the transition, I feel like the transition in the Bat books is far more instantaneous from the Silver Age to the Bronze Age for Batman versus Superman, which I feel like there was kind of more of a gradual, like, okay, we're going to cast aside some of these elements. We're going to introduce new elements kind of slowly. Whereas as Batman, I feel like you go right from the grinning dynamic duo, kind of cheesy thing, right into the Neal Adams, big, serious, bold, the Frank Robbins. They're very much all working from the same angle with Batman, which is to cast aside almost all of the silliness. Mm-hmm. There's a pretty clean cut that this collection of issues represents.
Yeah. The thing with Batman and the Bronze Age, for me, is the TV show gives this like a weird sort of bump in the road. You could almost say like, well, Bronze Age Batman starts when Carmine Infantino puts the oval around the bat symbol. But of course, that's to line up with the TV show, which of course is not anything like what we consider Bronze Age Batman. Return to the, I almost said grim and gritty, but that's not really the seriousness, I guess, of the character, that it's not until the TV show gets canceled, DC is like, well, we had to have Batman look just like the TV show that now nobody cares about. We need to, we do need to course correct really quick. And you're right, that shift does happen really quickly, but it almost happens almost despite some of DC's intentions, because of the way Neal Adams, by force of by force of will, by force of his Neal Adamsness, pushes into being the the focal point that everybody starts taking their cues from. Because as we'll see in these first batch of issues that I want to talk about, is these Brave and the Bold issues, it's Neal drawing Batman off to the side. It's kind of very much like, Jack Kirby comes on to Superman. Does he take over action? Does he take over Superman? No, he goes, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and starts doing weird shit over there. Neal starts with Brave and the Bold 79, Dead Man, teaming up with Batman. And in just the way he starts portraying Batman in that issue, and readers looking at it being like, oh, wait, no, he's supposed to look like that. How come we can't get that on the real Bat book? And that really started a chain reaction that we'll kind of see with Neal, but also with other creators. I didn't really want this to be a 90-minute discussion of how awesome Neal Adams is, right? Because there are other people on Batman. The first question I was contemplating asking was, can you have a Bronze Age Batman discussion without mentioning Neal Adams?
No.
And, well, I mean, you can't, right? Even like in the question, like just bringing him up in the question, sort of invalidates it. But I think there are other names you can talk about, and I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about at least some of them.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a whole list of comics for us to read. Normally I would sort of list them all off now, but I'm going to go sort of chunk by chunk, because I think some of these were very necessary and some of them maybe not so much. So we'll kind of refine the list a little bit as we go. But this first chunk of issues is Neal Adams's run on Brave and the Bold. We're going to be talking about issues 79 to 86, and then 93 and 94. This has Batman teaming up with Deadman, the Creeper, Green Arrow, Aquaman, the Teen Titans, House of Mystery, which I think was an interesting issue. Reading these, how did they strike you?
Yeah, for the most part, they were a lot of fun, and it struck me that they're taking Batman more seriously right from the jump here. And I think it would have been easy to do some of these team ups and make them kind of goofy. There's a lot of Silver Age nonsense that happens in the Teen Titans books or the Aquaman books for sure, and it seems like they made a concerted effort to kind of, I don't mean to sound like I'm denigrating like some of these other properties, but like everything comes up to Batman's level, right? The Teen Titans story is fairly like serious. Like there's some serious stuff that happens in that. Bruce like adopts a new ward, and that ward ends up dying by the end of the issue. Spoiler alert. And that's not to say that Teen Titans was never serious back in this day and age, but like when I think about it, when I think about like early Teen Titans, like pre-Wolfman and Perez Teen Titans, for the most part, they're just kind of Silver Agey, one-off, kind of disposable stories. At least that's my impression. That's my recollection, right? Whereas I think like paired with Batman, they make sure that the team up meets Batman's tone and not the other way around. And I think a lot of that has to do with Neal Adams' art, for one thing. Adams just draws such a big, bold, dramatic, serious. And when I say serious, I don't. You said this earlier, and you're absolutely right. Grim and gritty is not the word. That's not accurate. There's a comic where Neal Adams draws Batman with a big smile on his face singing Christmas carols in this. Like, it's not grim and gritty. It's just serious compared to the Joker's boner era that came like right before this, you know?
Yeah, context is important.
Right, exactly. the very first story, like the Dead Man and Batman one that you had us read. First of all, these are dense too, you know.
Yeah.
Not only are they like more dramatic and serious than what came before, but they are dense, but like meaningfully dense. That's another thing that I love about the Bronze Age compared to the ages that come before. There's a lot of words in Golden Age and Silver Age comics, and they're not always the most necessary. You know, a lot of times it's just exposition, especially in the Golden Age. A lot of times the words are describing what you can plainly see on the page. And that kind of falls away in the Bronze Age, but they are still very wordy. It's just that they're packing so much. Every one of these is like a full story. Like in this day and age, they'd be like 3-issue arcs, I think. Like the length is only about 20 to 24 pages or something like that, but the density of the story and where it goes from beginning to end is really impressive. Right away, the main point of the story is Bruce trying to help Boston Brand, but using his Bruce Wayne identity, right? He's not jumping in right as Batman right away, which I think is a thing that Bruce played a heavy role in Silver Age Batman stories for sure. But they really are highlighting like Bruce as a more rounded person, I think, as we go through the Bronze Age. He's not just this like jolly grinning guy that pals around with Robin and then like becomes Batman every once in a while. He's this like serious figure that has angles to the way he approaches things in his civilian identity versus his Bat identity, which I think, like, as with everything else in the Bronze Age, it starts to deepen that idea. You know, you start to go a little bit further exploring that. And I think you can see that across these issues, and the Dead Man one is a good example of that. But I think, like, the real draw to these Brave and the Bold issues, and to, you know, a majority of the issues that we're going to talk about, is the Adams art. Just how, like, again, I hate to crap on the Silver Age, but like you can just go a few issues back into the Silver Age and you'll see these big, uncanny, like grinning figures of Batman and Robin, and they just kind of look cartoonish in a way that, like, again, for their time, it's not like they were substandard, but then you go right into the transition to Neal Adams and you can like, oh God, this man is on some other planet drawing these characters, you know?
Yeah.
Like in the Dead Man issue, there's this wonderful scene where towards the end, the bad guy is like shooting a gun, and I think like I think it's Batman has like a sword or something, and he like dodges it, and it bounces off of his sword blade, and the bullet comes back and kills the guy. And the way that Adams depicts that with like the motion and the drama, and just how much bigger the panels are now in the Bronze Age, and like the way that he fills those panels with action rather than, you know, the exposition kind of falls away. That's just a recurring theme throughout these Brave and the Bold comics that Adams draws pretty much all of these, I think. And then on something like the Flash issue, I don't know how many times Neal Adams really drew the Flash, at least in an issue of a comic, you know?
Right.
I'm sure I've seen Flash pinups by Adams, but like, and so it's special to see him do that here in Brave and the Bold. And you see like the Flash like bouncing off of asteroids in space. And again, the way that Adams depicts that motion is Silver Age Flash comics were no slouches themselves. Infantino and all the great artists that kind of changed where motion and drama and stuff really started to transition from golden to silver to bronze. But getting to see Adams do that, it's a rarity with the Flash. So yeah, I mean that's one I would definitely keep as well.
Yeah.
The Aquaman one is like that's again, there's more like Playboy Bruce Wayne in that one, and it has to deal with like Ocean Master owns a rival company or something, and it's this big like corporate drama mixed with superheroing, and it's so dense and so there's a lot to chew on. So these issues are really great. I'm rambling here.
No. That's good. Let me just give you a chance to breathe.
Yeah, sure.
For a second.
This is what I do on the DC3 cast,
Yeah.
by the
Oh,
way.
no,
in
no, it's
case anyone-
great. This is fantastic. I did just want to mention, I really like the point that you brought up about how dense the writing is. And I want to stick a pin in it because I think it becomes really important later on. And not just like the writing in these issues in particular, but just sort of in general, the idea of having pages that are, let's say, chock-a-block with word balloons, and then pages where they aren't, right? So we'll come
Mhm.
back to that. Second, these Brave and the Bold issues are almost all written by Bob Haney,
Yes.
who a writer at DC so renowned he got his own Earth H, which is basically like any story that you can't figure out sort of where it goes. Chances are it's just on Earth H because Bob Haney did not give a shit about continuity if it got in the way of getting to a good story. Batman and Sergeant Rock. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
such a good issue. Neal Adams being a friend and contemporary and a huge fan of Joe Kubert, he does essentially a Joe Kubert cover because he is such a fan. Kubert, obviously, the Sergeant Rock artist and editor and writer of many years. So Batman teams up with Sergeant Rock. You would think that either we would see a very old Sergeant Rock in this comic because this is set or this is published in 1970. World War II was 25 years earlier. So having Bruce Wayne back in World War II, there'd be some sort of like time travel involved, right? Some like time storm or time machine or whatever. This is a Bob Haney comic. No, none of that. None of that. Bruce just happens to be working back in the 40s as Batman and happens to still be working as Batman in the now late 60s. It's fantastic. It's maybe my favorite out of all of them.
It's really good. And maybe out of the Brave and the Bold ones alone,
Yeah,
maybe has my favorite Neal Adams art in it. I think every page looks so good, so dramatic and detailed and great as like a period piece,
Mm-hmm.
When I read that story again, it's so dense. You get to the end and you're like, "Oh my god, I had like a whole meal there,"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I got to the end, I sat there and I was like, "Did I miss something?"
Yeah.
because of what you're saying. Like I was like, "How if you think too hard about that, that doesn't make any sense."
Right.
But it doesn't matter. I mean,
No.
pretend it is on Earth Haney. I guess it is at this point. It's just a well-told story and well drawn and dramatic and melancholy and all the things, It's really good even if it doesn't make sense in the greater context. Things don't have to make sense.
No, they don't. I think we get caught up on that when the story isn't good enough to make us not care.
Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind is there's a line from, or Mark Hamill was talking about being on the set of Star Wars, and they had just finished shooting, or the scene where they come out of the trash compactor, and he's standing next to Han Solo / Harrison Ford, and he's like, "Wait a minute, shouldn't my hair be all like messed up with schmutz because it just came out of all the garbage and stuff?" And Harrison leans over and is like, "Kid, if everyone's paying attention to your hair, we got bigger problems than that." So like it's like not that type of movie. Like yeah, don't worry about it. Now the fact that Bruce Wayne doesn't age for like 40 years in this is a little bit more of a plot hole that you could drive a Sherman tank through than the amount of the dampness of somebody's hair when coming out of a trash compactor. But certainly Neal and Bob, they certainly do not pause to let us ponder the fact that this is not temporally possible. And yeah, Neal just I mean, it's interesting looking at these issues again, back to back to back to back like this. You can see Adams get better every issue. And by better, that can mean a particular rendering. You can see him trying a different pose that maybe he didn't pull off quite as well a couple of issues before. Now it's got that little bit of extra fluidity that doesn't catch your eye on it, or his panel layouts, which I think are something that make his art stand out in a way that isn't necessarily super obvious, which is weird because it's the way he breaks up a panel and the way he still has panel borders and stuff, but they become intensely malleable, right? His panels aren't rectangles. They're not squares. They're
Yeah.
weird, any type of geometric shape he can use. 1, 2, 3. I'm looking at page, if anybody's playing along, page 16 on that Brave and the Bold Sergeant Rock issue. And it's a 4-panel page, but it's like he's got one panel sort of diagonally like through kind of the middle of the page, and it's on like the bottom tier and the middle tier at the same time. There's like a pizza slice right above it and stuff. And he's very much, it's how can I make each panel the biggest it can be on the page while still being on the same page as these other panels. There's no dead space. Yep. Right? There is absolutely no dead space. He uses every part of that page for everything. And I remember, I guess this would have come out maybe around the same time, maybe a little differently. His X-Men run, I feel like was like 69, 70s, or maybe just after this or somewhat concurrently. Math is hard. But there's that one issue of X-Men where Beast and Iceman are being attacked by a Sentinel in, I guess, like Beast's apartment or something. And Iceman accidentally knocks him out of the apartment. And so Beast is falling. And so Neal Adams has him falling, if I'm remembering correctly, like diagonally across a double page spread. It was like literally the furthest amount of space he could have a character move. And that type of the elasticity of the page is in some ways just as much of a Neal thing as his rendering and stuff. And you don't really see that in his, in his pinups and his covers and all of that things. But once you're seeing his pages, that becomes much more obvious, and it can be more powerful when he doesn't do it. Right?
Yeah. It almost has the effect of like a double page spread, even though it's not a double pager. I think I'm on the page that you're talking about, which is where Batman's like flipping and grabbing the Nazi and then throwing the Nazi as he's doing a somersault.
No.
Okay. The only reason I said that is because there's a pizza slice panel right above it as well. But it does illustrate the thing that you're talking about, because you see the full somersault because of the weird shape of the panel. And again, most artists, they would either draw that in some like more simple manner, or they wouldn't show the whole flip. But here you get the entire almost like animation of it. Not only that, but it starts in the foreground and then it ends in the background.
Yeah.
So it's almost like there's a dimensional effect to it. That's just not many artists at this time were thinking in that way, It's just so impressive. And then that's to not even say anything about Adams' figure work, which I think is really advanced the way that Cape Comics artists were drawing the human figure, like this somersaulting, stretching Batman that has this like detail in his like rib muscles, and it's all stuff that Adams was uniquely thinking about that other artists, maybe some were, but it wasn't commonplace the way that it is now, thinking about musculature and how that would look. And it certainly doesn't have to be there, but it's there and it's noticeable, and you appreciate it. You appreciate the sheer detail of it. It's crazy.
Yeah. All right. Now the next issue, 85, is one I would keep for a couple of reasons. One, this is where Batman teams up with Green Arrow. This is the Neal Adams redesign issue. This is the first time we see. This is the first time we see Ollie with the Errol Flynn goatee and everything, which seems super obvious, but I did not even pick up on that until I read about it sort of somewhere else, and I was like, "Oh, is that the issue? Oh,
that's the one.
That's the one." So yeah, here's another Bruce Wayne and Oliver Queen teaming up, not only in their costumes, but also in their civilian entities. Bruce Wayne gets appointed interim senator for whatever state Gotham happens to be in.
Yep.
Yeah. This
is like, I don't, as far as I know, that's never been talked about in the history of Bruce Wayne afterwards.
Nope.
Of course, it took. We now know it took place on Earth Haney, but
yeah, a senator, trying to get an anti-crime bill, a super important anti-crime bill He gets shot. He is near death. The governor is like, Bruce, I need you to go vote for this thing. I need you to finish the senator's term, which I'm looking at it on the page here, would basically be like, I need you to be, a senator for 6 years. Right. Because I was like, maybe he's like a state senator. It's like, no. Later on, he whatever, U.S. senator. I hereby accept the office of United States Senator. I'm like, all right, so that's 6 years. Yeah. I mean, at least they had the governor like appoint him. I was like, okay, well, that's technically that's sort of how that goes down. Yeah. Show up for the politics, and then be amazed by the Green Arrow. It's just the action and everything.
Yeah. And I believe is this the issue where Ollie and Bruce both give away their secret identities to the same guy on separate occasions because he's a psychiatrist and he's sworn not to tell anyone.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So I don't have a problem with that logically. I really don't.
Right.
But it is funny though that excuse has not been used more often in superhero comics, like that they all don't have therapists that they can admit their secret identities to,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give Tom King any ideas, but
right.
I feel like that's a well that has been underutilized,
Yeah. Well, I mean, luckily for them, afterwards, he begins sessions to self-hypnotize himself, to wipe the knowledge of these two great heroes' identities from my mind.
As you do.
Yeah. Of the Brave and the Bold issues, any other one jump out for any particular reason?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the only one that before the show you said something about we could get rid of the hellgrammite. And I don't know. It certainly wasn't bad, but I find out of all I'm looking at my notes right now, and out of all the ones that we read from the Brave and the Bold category, that is the one I had the least to say about, and I remember the least of. Like, I don't even, was the hellgrammite some kind of like grasshopper creature? Is that right?
I think so. Yeah. Honest to God, I first thought like it was made up, but apparently a hellgrammite is a thing.
Okay.
It's like a little cricket grasshopper type of insecty thing. The design is weird. Half man, half insect, but not like, an anthropomorphized insect. It's like, no, it's like a man wearing like sort of an insect suit, but you can tell it's not a suit. It's like part of his body because he's like naked and also has like a regular head, but also has like an insect head sort of on top of it. And you're like, that's bizarre.
It's weird. The reason to keep it in here would be that design, and also like just getting to see Neal Adams draw the Creeper is fun. But
that's true.
But that is the one story where it's like I honestly don't remember anything from it.
Yeah. And then the later two, the 93, 94, 93 is Batman and the House of Mystery, which is actually written by Danny O'Neill, and Adams does, I think, pencils and inks on it. That one was actually pretty well done, I'd have to say, in keeping with kind of the House of Mystery format,
Yes.
But still having it be a Batman story. And then after that, Batman and the Teen Titans again. This one drawn by Nick Cardy, of course, Mr. Teen Titan at the time, is a fairly representative story of clashing generations, right? Like some teens have apparently stolen an atomic bomb or whatever, and they're holding the city ransom, and so Batman is trying to deal with this on the sort of the adult level while the Teen Titans are running around looking for the bomb and stuff. And is again representationally, it's like, you know what, that's fine.
Yeah. So I got a kick out of the name of the gang of teens that they called themselves. They called themselves Stop, the Society to Outlaw Parent Power.
Yeah. Stop with two P's. Yeah.
Yep. I know my stepdaughter is becoming a member of that. So
well, there you go. All right. So let's Brave and the Bold. Moving on, Batman 217 is important because it is written by Frank Robbins, drawn by Novick, and inked by Giordano. This is where Robin leaves. This is where Batman and Alfred leave the mansion. They move into the Wayne penthouse, and Bruce starts up the VIP program,
Yeah.
aka Victim Wait, is it Victim
Victims
Incorporated?
Inc. Yeah.
Victims
Yeah, it is.
Incorporated.
I'm not sure what happens to the P, and I guess that's part of Corporated.
Victims Incorporated program. There you go. So
Okay.
P is
All
for,
right.
yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So yeah, this is like a big issue.
It is, yeah. Monumental.
I don't know how much sort of prelude there was to this in terms of Dick making the decision to, because this is basically where he goes off to college, right? He's not just saying, screw you guys, I'm out of here. He's like, screw you, I'm taking your dollar and I'm going to college on your dime.
Mm-hmm.
Cab shows up, takes him off, then Alfred's like, what are we going to do? Bruce is like, we are blowing this popsicle stand. And so, the end of the manor and the beginning of putting Bruce into the city, which I think is ultimately a good, I think it's a good look,
Yeah. And that lasted a good long while. When did he go back to the Batcave?
I mean, I think it stuck for a pretty good while, maybe like into the 80s.
I think you're right. Oh, yep. Jerry Conway and Doug Mensch took Bruce Wayne back to Wayne.
Yeah.
Okay. I love shakeups like this, where it's like Bruce is like he seems to be having like an immediate midlife crisis,
and
like let's turn everything over, Alfred. And then poor Alfred is like just completely at his mercy because that's your boss, just saying like, we're leaving the only life you've ever known.
Yeah. So, so all the Neal Adams stuff, Brave and the Bold's been happening, has been published mid-68 into 69. This Batman 217 came out in October of 69. So if you were to have this in a book, you'd be seeing Neal Adams. You're like, all right, great. And then you're like, oh, back in the main book, it's looked like this. Which is to say nothing, like, I'm not trying to put down Irv Novick, right?
No.
Like, artist, draftsman, perfectly crumpulent, I think, is that the word? Crumpulent, however you want to.
That's what we say, yep.
However you want to go. But you'd be like, oh, wow, there's something, it's missing something, right?
It is.
But then you look and you're like, all right, Frank Robbins, in terms of coming to these issues and being reminded of what's here, my appreciation for Frank Robbins has grown probably the most out of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I had forgotten that he had written as much Batman as he had. And to see his name pop up on these just as a writer, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Are you familiar with his work?
In so much that if I ever intersected with it during my like Detective Comics read through, I read a little bit. Can't say that I've probably read enough to pick up on any like recurring themes or anything like that. Right. But I think I agree with you after reading this though. Like my appreciation for him is definitely like he's underrated for the Bronze Age. These are some pretty like important establishing stories, I think, for what the whole thing is going to be. And then O'Neill takes it to some other galaxy, but like this gets the ball rolling.
He certainly was a really good team player. He was a strip cartoonist before working on the Batman book. So he did the Johnny Hazard adventure strip for like 30 years before this, during this, and after this. So just seeing him as a writer, I was like, oh wait, is that the same guy? Oh yeah, I guess it is. And then later on, we will see a couple of issues that he drew, and you're just like, oh man, that guy, that's the same guy that wrote the other thing. Oh, yeah. So we'll talk about those in a minute. Also, going back to the earlier question about these creators trying to make this character relevant in this new decade that they're finding themselves in, the idea of Bruce being more than just somebody who puts on a bat costume and, punches people, right? Like Bruce using his money and his whatever to help people in the way of like the Wayne Foundation or, the VIP. How would this work in the real world, quote unquote? For Superman, that turns out to be, does the world need a Superman? Right? It sort of goes in those directions. It's interesting to see instances where that type of impulse, be it from, Robbins or Neal Adams or Denny O'Neil or whoever wanting to take Batman in a certain way, what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Or over to Detective Comics, 400, 402, and 407. Man-Bat.
Yeah. I love these stories.
Okay.
There's a few of them in this volume, I think. One of the things about the early Bronze Age Batman stuff is that it seemed like they were intentionally trying to stay away from Batman's rogues, right? Even the Joker will show up later in this volume, but like they didn't start off with a Joker story. They didn't start off with Catwoman, whoever, Penguin. They did kind of these like one-offs that didn't stick, like Hellgrammite, or like kind of reality-based villains like random assassins or whoever that was in that first Dead Man issue, Kubla Kane. If we ever saw that guy
the
again,
Hook.
I don't know,
Yeah,
maybe, but yeah. But so now here, I think this is where you start to. Well, Man-Bat was a new character for this, right? Like this is the debut of Man-Bat. But this is where you start to fold back in some of the rogues and maybe come up with some new ones that are actually going to stick, that actually have like concepts that are not just basic crime comic tropes, First of all, I think the way that Adams draws Man-Bat and Mrs. Man-Bat is like iconic.
Yeah.
It's this mix of EC horror with DC superheroes in a way, and not something that the mainstream superhero comics really were dealing with very often. And so that's a big deal. But also like there's weird like moral grapplings that Bruce does in these because he has to determine whether I forget exactly how it goes, but it's like if I do this, I kill him. If I do this, I kill. How does it go? Do you remember?
I'm flipping through it right now.
There is some kind of like moral grappling that he needs to do. Here it is. Does Bruce give him the cure and kill him, or let him live as Man-Bat? Is what I wrote. Again, Adams is so good at drawing that like human drama. So like Bruce is like really wrestling with this, and you kind of see it in the art as well, and it's very like classic horror, like the agony of being a monster weighed against like the mundanity of a normal life. It's a big idea stuff for like a horror comic mixed with superheroing, and you just I can't get enough of like the big Neal Adams, big figures, big panels, weird Man-Bat filling the panel, and just it looks so good. I was pleased to see a few of these stories in here.
Yeah. Interesting thing about Man-Bat, the origin of Man-Bat, the actual like production origin, Robbins and editor Julia Schwartz were having a story conference at DC offices, and Neal happened to be there. They didn't seem to be having any ideas, and Julie's like, "Hey, Neal, do you have an idea?" And he's like, "Yeah, I do. Man-Bat." Julie's like, "What?" He's like, "Man-Bat." He's like, "It's a stupid idea." And Neal's like, "Well, if we don't do it, Marvel can always do it.
Oh,
Marvel can come up with a Man-Bat, and then we can't really do anything, can we?" Julie's like, "You'll draw it, right?" He's like, "Yep. Yes, I will." Hence Man-Bat. So Frank Robbins was obviously also really keen on the idea. So he and Neal worked together on it. So it is co-created by Frank and Neal. But the whole, Marvel could do that. And they're like, "Oh shoot." Yeah. So that's good. But yeah, I mean, just watching Neal playing up the horror and the agony of a dude who's like a bat flying around with pants on. All right, so detective going back. Now we are at Batman 232, Daughter of the Demon. This is, of course, the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul or Ra's al Ghul, depending on where you've heard the name before. So I wanted to include as much of the Ra's al Ghul stuff in the book as I could, but I didn't want to do every kind of appearance because Talia had shown up a couple of times before this issue, but it wasn't anything that wasn't, sort of summarized later, and it wasn't drawn by Neal or by somebody kind of that caliber. We got to have room for hellgrammite. So,
Yeah.
so if you get, a collection like Tales of the Demon or something, there will be a couple of issues that are included before this, but I feel like this is the first appearance of Rust. So we're going with this. What does this do for you?
I love this stuff too. I love the whole O'Neal Adams Ra's al Ghul saga is just like catnip for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be overstated like how much of this stuff is still iconic and like omnipresent today. Like Man-Bat shows up every once in a while. Like Kirk Langstrom had like a pretty good run in a recent-ish, I think it was a Detective Comics run where he was like, or maybe it was like a Justice League Dark type thing. He was involved in something recently, some arc, but he shows up, he comes and goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Ra's al Ghul, Talia, the League of Assassins, mostly through Damian's existence, is just something that is a constant reference point in Batman now. Like it is part and parcel. You read a Batman story, if it's got Damian in it, likely there's some reference or connection to material that was invented here.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild how important it is, and it's wild how good. I mean, it's still like some of the best Batman stories you could ever read. The fact that it's like this globe trotting, like immediately they take Robin out of Gotham, right? He gets tranked and kidnapped, which is just the number of times that Batman and Robin went globe trotting up until now. You could maybe count on like one hand, probably.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now they're going across the world to this mysterious cult that we've never seen before, and it becomes this massive iconic thing. And even in this series of issues, towards the end, when you get to the Lazarus Pit stuff, like Adams, like creating all of that artistically, it's imagery that lasts to this day too. All this design work is iconic, and it's now it's been 50 years or whatever it's been, and it's endured. That's how good it is. It's apparent when you read it how it still looks just as good as anything.
Yeah, you as I was reading this, I could almost hear the John Barry James Bond score.
Yeah,
right?
yes.
Because that's basically, it's like, oh, Batman as international man of mystery.
Yep.
It's so good. One of the things I wanted to come back to is, one of your earlier points about how dense some of these pages can be, just in terms of dialogue and not even like extraneous things, like necessary things, but your eye gets used to a certain density of text information, word balloons or whatever, on these pages. This isn't the first time this happens, but if you're flipping through on page, let's say 15 of issue 232, where Batman, they're in the Himalayas and he surprises a guard, a 9-page panel. Let's try that again. 9-panel page. 9-panel page. Yeah. Batman, swings around, hides in the snow, waits for this guard to walk by, pops up, punches him unconscious, and walks away. There's no word balloons. There's no sound effects. There is sort of one narration caption that keeps it from being a completely silent page. But just, here I'm just sort of flipping through, the pages before, and when you get to that silence / lack of word balloons, lack of narration, it's stunning in a way. It is a narrative tool that this is where, and we may have talked about this for the Superman stuff, but this is where comics really allow the art to tell the story for effect. And I guess writers and editors don't feel like that material has to be there if there's no real reason for it to be there. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll see later on, as we keep talking about these comics, more and more instances of the most powerful moments are ones that are silence or use that silence. The more powerful ones come right after very loud, visually chaotic pages, right? In a movie sense, it's that instant silence after a really loud sound, or like the opposite of a jump scare or a audio jump scare or whatever. I guess. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It also does a thing that Batman comics will do from now until the end of time, but it conceals Batman as he's kicking this guy's ass. So like, in Gotham, he's doing that from the shadows, right? So like how many times in a comic or like in the most recent The Batman movie, he'd be like in the shadows, all you can see is maybe like a fist or like just a glimpse of him as he's like grabbing a guy from the shadows and beating him up and then tossing him down. They do it all the time, and it's Batman as a specter that haunts Gotham, and that whole thing. Here he's in the white snow, nowhere to hide, and yet Adams like expertly, you see a foot in one panel or you see Bruce's fist in another panel. He dispatches with this guy the same way that he would in Gotham City, but he's out here in the naked white snow. It's just conceptually, it's such a satisfying page when you contrast it with the environment he's usually seen.
Yeah. And then a couple of little one-off Batman issues, 234, 237. 234 is a Two-Face issue, Half an Evil. We get a nice little recap of Two-Face's origin. Of the two, my favorite is 237. But did you have anything about 234?
That it's more of the Bronze Age starting to fold those rogues back in, kind of reestablishing them, taking them more seriously. That's a recurring theme that we're gonna see. The story itself is good. It's a little silly, but Two-Face stories kind of always are. Where like he sinks a boat only to raise it later so that he can steal the doubloons from it. Maybe you're doing too much, Harvey. Like there's probably a quicker way to get what you wanted out of that, but I'm no supervillain, so who am I to say? But that's all I really have to say about that issue. Yeah, I 237 I do quite like for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
It's kind of a harrowing story because it's Bruce Wayne like tracks down a Nazi war criminal that's still living and in this town and interfering in some way with this Halloween parade, and it deals with like this generational trauma of like Nazism or whatever. It's really quite affecting, but also like it's this thing that I think O'Neill was doing at the time, which is inserting like social issues and the evils of society in some ways into these comics in a way that they hadn't really been dealt with before. And so it was kind of stunning to see some of the imagery surrounding like the Nazis and the Holocaust imagery, and it's quite good.
Yeah, the having a costume party is sort of part of the point, not the point of the story, but it certainly helps out a lot of the story. But tying it back to the Holocaust and the Jewish guy getting revenge on the Nazis, and if you spend too much time with monsters, you become a monster yourself. That idea, and everything is all really well done. It has one of the best splash pages I've ever seen. Robin is surprised by the sort of the villain of the piece, dressed up as the Grim Reaper with a scythe. And it's essentially the same image that we see on the cover. And the page itself, Robin is bottom of the foreground. He's on the ground. He is sort of turning and looking behind him. And behind him is the figure of the, sort of the Grim Reaper with the scythe. And his body's twisted and he's about to sort of bring the blade down on Dick Grayson there. There's no sound effects. There's no word balloons. There's no nothing. It is just one of the most effective images Neal has put down. And unfortunately, if you happen to look at this anywhere, I think, other than the original comic or maybe an earlier reprint, now if you look at it, Neal had added a bunch of like red, jagged shapes around, almost like speed lines or like excitement lines around the figure now to make it, quote unquote, more dramatic. But now I think because it takes away from the stark horror.
Yeah.
Of the violence of the image, like it comic bookizes it in a way that the original didn't. I mean, it's still very effective, but without that chaff there, for lack of a better term, it's stunning. And the whole issue is great. Even the very first page, which is almost like a title page or something, looks like Batman has been staked to a tree, which is also moody as fuck, and it's great. But that Reaper image, it's kind of spoiled from the cover, right? You're like, oh, here's, and usually the interior is never as good as the cover. The interior splash page.
Oh, it's way better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
first
so
of all,
good.
the absence of Batman on the actual page in the comic is important, but also just the coloring is more moody and effective inside. It's a little more muted. There's not that bright red beaming behind them, It's very dusky, which is important to the feel.
Yeah.
Not since you bring up Adams tinkering with that page.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about briefly. I think Adams has gone through and tinkered with some of the art in the
yes.
Ra's al Ghul stuff too. In the years past.
that would not surprise me one bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen some of it, and I just think like, man, the original's better. Try to find the original if you can.
Yeah, I'm on record about not seeing the need for some of the upgrades that Neal did, really just in terms of coloring, right? Of
maybe that's what it was. Maybe it's just coloring.
And the real the real bitch of this is, of course, that looking at these things digitally, whenever you look at these issues on like DC Infinite or whatever, it'll go from like flat coloring, Neal issue, it's been Nealized. Next issue, flat coloring, and it's annoying. I'm not even saying he can't do it, right? Because who am I to say that, right? What I would just like is to, as a company, just have access to the originals as well. It's digital. Just you can turn on Neal, turn on the Neal filter, and turn off the Neal filter. It's just having two sets of the same files. Like, it's not that hard. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Night of the Reaper, fantastic fucking comic, however you happen to see it. Now we've got a couple of DC, well, it's all DC. Sorry, I should look at my note initial here. Detective Comics 420, 421, and 429. These are 3 one-shot stories written and drawn by Frank Robbins, bringing it back to the cartoonist. Interesting bit of comics trivia. Frank Robbins is the first creator to write and draw a Batman story.
Oh, wow.
And that is issue 420. Yeah. What did you think of these?
I grew to like his art as I read these. It was a little bit of a transition from Adams to him. I think like the artist that he reminded me most of, to put it in a modern context, is Scott Collins. You can really see it in the eyes, I think. And once I was like on that wavelength with it, I really started to enjoy it. The only thing these comics were missing for me were some of the moodiness from Neal Adams. Like because one of these is a Man-Bat story again, right? And there's that EC horror element that I was feeling in the Adams drawn ones that like now I'm missing. So, but apart from that, like I think he's a hell of a writer, and I think better than a lot of artist writers at drawing for his own script or writing for his own art. Like I think it's not a lot of explaining what's happening on the page. It's a lot of doing double duty, getting an idea across with an image and getting dialogue that's not redundant. It's good work. It's definitely good work. I just felt like, especially in the Man-Bat one in particular, like I wanted this to be a little more like moody. That's what I'm missing from those Adams ones.
All right. Yeah, it will probably not surprise you to hear that fan reaction to Robbins's art was mixed.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, people went from the Neal Adams or Irv Novick or whoever and they were like, "What the fuck is this?" Somebody, yeah. There was one letter written by a guy who I'll name in a second. It said it looked like Batman had spent the day working on the Batmobile, like under the carriage, and didn't bother cleaning off his suit before going out to fight crime.
Oh, because of all the there's
Because of all the
heavy,
blacks in
heavy
this fight.
shadow,
Yeah. The guy who wrote that fan letter, Bob Rozakis, yeah, ended up working and writing for DC within at least 10 years of writing that, maybe, maybe a little earlier. But yeah,
that's fun when you find a creator letter in there.
Yeah. You're like, oh, you don't say. Oh, well, see if we can offer you a paycheck and it'll change your mind. And people are like, hey, I love this fake Robin stuff. Yeah, I love these books. I had read the Man-Bat one earlier because it was included in the greatest Batman stories ever told, which is a longer story. But going back, and I'd forgotten that he didn't do very many. As a matter of fact, I don't know if he did many more than these three, but I didn't find out about these three until actually really, really, really recently. And I absolutely adored them. It comes off for me as like a Darwin Cook type of vibe, which of course I am 120% here for. But he is, and especially when he's inking himself, here it is, he may even have lettered himself as well. I'm not sure. But going from, the guy who was writing some of the Bat comics to, when you just give him everything, you're like, oh yeah, he totally has a complete command of the comics page and everything. And he did a comic strip for 30 years. Oh, you don't say. I couldn't, you look at this and it's so good. The second one in particular, Detective 421, Blind Justice, Blind Fear, the prison break-in issue, I thought was real. It was my favorite of the three. And I was like, man, why hasn't this thing been reprinted a ton? This thing's great. And then I'm reading some of the dialogue and there's some, I'm like,
I was like, what is he talking about? Oh, okay, yeah.
You're like, okay, I can see that's a shame. Can we we can censor that, right? Can we just bleep some of that stuff out? Don't be subtle about it. Like, that's fine. Yeah, boy. Oof. It is this is not on DC Infinite. This you'd really have to scour various places to find it. The art is fantastic.
The art's great. Oh, the page that you sent earlier today of Bruce breaking through the bars or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks so good. It's so dramatic.
Yeah, this is great. And then some of the dialogue, obviously inmates talking, about each other, calling each other various names. I was like, is this Oz? It's like, and that's kind of like, you're like, Bronze Age Batman, blah, blah, blah. It's like Batman, Batman and Attica. Right. And you're like, wow, that's something, Batman and Attica drawn by Frank Robbins. Yes. Give me more of that. So I would at least want to have at least one story and art by Frank Robbins or issue in this book, because god damn, that guy was on point. Okay. We got sort of finishing off the Ra's al Ghul section, Batman 242, 243, and 244. 2 Neal issues and 1 Irv Novick and Dick Giordano. The Irv Novick issue 242, the first and maybe only appearance of Matches Malone.
Yeah.
You see the Lazarus Pits. This is, of course, 244. Shirtless Batman and Ra's al Ghul going at it.
Iconic.
Fucking iconic. So for me, it's interesting reading these and looking at this. I didn't come across these until after I'd seen the Batman animated episode. A pretty straight adaptation for a lot of this stuff. So my Ra's al Ghul, of course, sounds like David Warner, as he should. No offense, Liam Neeson, but oh god, that's David Warner. But yeah, shirtless Batman, James Bond Batman, Grant Morrison's Love Batman.
Yeah. Oh. And before you get to the shirtless duel, you get in 243, I have to talk about those last few pages where
Oh
where
yeah.
Ross is dead. He's laying on the table dead, and Bruce, like, they're cleaning up, they're walking away, job's finished, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see like the eerie bubbling as he's lowered into the Lazarus pit, and then the series of like progressively bigger panels of
Mm-hmm.
Al Ghul like waking up on the bed, coming out from under the sheet. And I love, love the narration there where it says a mirthless, insane joy glittering in his eyes. And Adams draws him just as this, like, you can see it in his face. He's like a blank slate,
Mm-hmm.
He's
Mm-hmm.
like, and he like saunters off of the table in this like with this like mad grin on his face. It's so good. It
Yeah.
gets across perfectly, I think, the idea that they were going for there. That, like, yes, he's back from the dead, but there's a price to be paid. There's something a little bit fucked up about him
Mm-hmm.
right now because of it. Yeah, it's so good. I love those panels.
Yeah. I mean, these 3 issues. Is there a better Roz story than this one?
Kind of don't think so. I think uh, everything since has just been meditations on this story that already exists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they did it here. I think,
They kind of did. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I will say Roz has been used well since then by certain creators. I mean, I think Greg Rucka's both Death and the Maiden, and then the detective stuff like right before that, the Evolution the stuff. That stuff was really good, but I'm really struggling to think of another really good, Roz / Talia story, and not really getting one. So glad to have this here. All right, moving on. A quick little story. The Batman Nobody Knows from Batman 250. It's like a little 8-pager, also written by Frank Robbins, art by Dick Giordano. Bruce Wayne has taken a couple of kids on a field trip out to go camping. They're around the campfire, and the kids are all talking about Batman and how each one of them knows what Batman is. And it's interesting, all the different iterations of Batman that they conjure up. And then Bruce is like, you want to know what Batman's like, right? So, they're talking, and then he puts on his bat suit and jumps out. He's like, I think Batman looks like this. And they're like, Mr. Wayne, yawn. He's like, well, I guess I only scare the cowardly and superstitious lot, not the innocent. And you're like, oh, that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. I love stories
yeah.
like this. I love like mini anthologies within like a single story. It reminds me of like Almost Got Him from the animated series or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. So the animated series adapted that sort of by having like a Dick Sprang Batman be one version, and then the Dark Knight Batman being another one. And then I think the quote unquote third one was actually like, Batman. And then after that, we've got 251, which is the Joker's 5-way revenge, the return of the Joker as a homicidal maniac.
I think this is one of the best Joker stories, period.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for a character that has had like 100 stories written about him, this is probably in the top 10 or 15 or whatever you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like it's a reclaiming one of Batman's rogues for the Bronze Age and making him a little more serious, but still very recognizable as the Joker. This is maybe where you can kind of say that there's a like a grim and gritty change, because he's brutally murdering people, and like it's not like a Golden Age murders where they kind of like happen off panel or
Mm-hmm.
There's something a little more brutal and sinister about this Joker, but it really works for the character, and it begins to turn him into the iconic kind of Batman antagonist that he will be for the next 50 years. And
so thanks for that.
Yep. And it's yeah, right. But it's a good mystery too. Like it features Batman doing detective work, and another classic Joker trope, which is like a climactic confrontation with him. I think in this one it's like a Shark Tank that they're like precipitously fighting over, you know. But that's a trope, or that's a symbolism that we'll see time and time again. Like the first animated series Joker story, I think Christmas with the Joker was the first one. Again, they're like fighting over a pit or something. That's just something that Batman and the Joker will do, you know, till the end of time. It's funny because the way that the Joker loses in this is that he slips on like an oil slick or something, which is the perfect comedic. I love that. I love when Morrison did the same thing where the Joker like slips on a banana peel, or the Joker leaves a banana peel and Dr. Hurt slips on it. That's what it is. And just something that like silly but true to the character is needed, you know, in a world where writers can't get enough of doing like complete edgelord Heath Ledger Joker, you know, so twisted and self-serious, you know. I love when there's a little bit of an undercutting of the Joker, especially if it's his comeuppance in the end. It's just really fitting. So like one of the best Joker stories of all time, and it's one issue of a comic.
Yeah.
And it's dense as hell. So
yeah. It also has one of the most iconic Batman, I would say panels, but I guess this is a splash page. I'll try and describe it for folks. The ones where the panel where Batman's running. It's like a full body shot of Batman. He's running, sort of lunging forward. His left hand is forward. The cape is billowing kind of behind him. You'll like when you think of Neal Adams Batman running, this is the panel. It's page 21 in the comic if you are looking at it. But it is you're like, oh yeah, that one. Yeah, this is the story with you know, with that in it. And you can't really have a Bronze Age Batman collection without having that in there, because people would be like, what the fuck? And they would kind of be right. Okay, so not a Batman issue, not a Detective Comics issue, not a Brave and the Bold issue. Swamp Thing, number 7, guest starring Batman. Len Wein, Bernie Wrightson, one of the most iconic kind of non-Batman appearances of this era. What did you think?
I liked it. I always like Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing. It's just great to look at, and doing the fish out of water thing with him in Gotham, and he shows up in the GCPD, like immediately starts shooting him.
Yeah.
I haven't read a lot of or any really. I think maybe I read his like first appearance ever, maybe, which I don't think was even. Did Len Wein invent Swamp Thing?
He did. It was House of.
Oh, that's right. It's not in his own title. It's in House of House of Mystery or House of Secrets or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if that technically.
It's not the same Swamp Thing because it's not Alec Holland. It's Alex something or other, I think.
Yeah, and then Alan Moore, I think, retconned it in later. But essentially, like that was the, you know, the proto Swamp Thing, and then Swamp Thing 1 is like, you know, the actual Swamp Thing. One of the things is, of course, here we get interior monologue, not word balloons, thought balloons for Swamp Thing, which I got to say, kind of weird to. I mean, it's fine for the story, but just as somebody who is not used to seeing them. And now they're really cool. Like they're done as yellow instead of white. It's a really good visual to have it sort of stand out without being interior captions or those sort of things. But it's like he thinks in the same sort of stilted way that he talks, which is a little weird. It was good to see. You know, it's good to have it. I think it was good to have it in here. So, finally, fucking made our way through this collection of issues. what did you think?
Well, we didn't even talk about There's No Hope in Crime Alley, did we?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So that I was also going to bump that for next time. This was a little more of a work in progress than I think the Superman ones, where I was like,
Sure.
nope, boom, these are the things. And I think there were like another couple of issues that I put on the list that we didn't talk about.
There was a Joker.
Yeah, that Joker one didn't live up to. It was okay, and it was inked by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, but
Yes,
I was
it
like,
was.
but it was still. It was early Garcia Lopez, and I don't know. I mean, do you think it should be? Do you think it should be included?
You could probably leave it out, but I do have one little thing to say about it, which is,
oh sure, go ahead.
A fun thing that comic does is it has a little bit in it where there's a cartoon strip called Cashews, which is clearly supposed to be peanuts in like the Charles Schultz style, you know?
Oh yeah.
And that is a thing. Again, like this is unless I'm forgetting something, this is probably the first time I've encountered that sort of like playful genre border crossing in. So now you see that all the time, you know, like there's a Dial H for Hero series not that long ago where every issue had like a dozen different allusions to different art styles, different artists, different mediums, you know, that's something that's fairly commonplace. Now, it's always nice when you see it. It's fun when you see it. But back in the Bronze Age, I feel like, oh man, this comic is like crossing genre boundaries almost, and doing illusions and appreciating other art and kind of crossing over. And I thought that was cute. You know, it's a small thing, but I did want to mention it because that's not something that was commonplace back in this time. And yeah, otherwise, man, I love this project, and I just getting to feast on like Neal Adams art and Robbins and even Novik, even if it's like simplistic compared to Adams, let's say, it's still presenting a more serious and mature vision of Batman than what came in the Silver Age just before. And so it's like, even if he's not doing the exciting things with the pages the way that Adams is, the figure of Batman is still very much this like buffed up kind of what the modern interpretation that we know today of Batman. And so like even though his art's not as quote unquote good or exciting as Adams, it still played a role in advancing this image of Batman that DC was trying to move towards, I think. And so it's important.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, looking at volume 2, this we basically front loaded Neal Adams. I don't think there's any left, really.
Well, we hit the highlights for sure. So
yeah. Plus, he's got to go over and do, Superman, Muhammad Ali, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, he'll be busy on other stuff. But let's see. Next time we will have Walt Simonson is actually going to be an interesting through line through this as well. Some Marshall Rogers, some Mike Golden, some Jim Aparo, and an intercompany crossover. With some Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, so that's gonna be amazing to talk about. So, okie doke. I think that'll do it for today. Vince, thank you so much for sitting in on another one of these. I look forward to the next chapter of the greatest Batman Bronze Age stories.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, as always. Can't wait to do the next one.